not that I don't want you here. It's something about the way you stare into my eyes.
April Millsap was a 14-year-old girl that was murdered in 2014 in a small town in Michigan, and she actually helped solve her own murder because of a fitness tracker app she was using at the time of the crime. It's 2014 in the small town called Armada. At the time of the crime, and I think even now, the population is under 2,000 people, so very, very small village, and it's a generally safe area. In 2016, it was reported that they only had 2 full-time police officers. There were some that were part-time, but very small area. Everyone sort of knew everyone, and it was considered very safe. April lived there with her mom, stepdad, and she had a boyfriend she'd been dating around a year and a half named Austin. He didn't live with them, but he was a pretty big part of her life. April lived a very normal life. She went to school. All her friends describe her as really sweet and nice. She was also really into health and fitness, and she had several pets. Her favorite, I guess you could say, was Penny. Penny and April did everything together. They were best friends, and they would go out on walks, hikes, runs all the time together. July 24th, 2014, beautiful summer day. April decides that she wants to take Penny out for a walk, which is not unusual. She takes Penny out for hikes all the time. However, she never stays out past dark. As soon as the sun starts to set, she usually makes her way back home. So she left around 5:30 p.m. Her mom calls her when the sun starts to go down to see when she's going to be home. She doesn't respond. A few hours go by. The mom tries calling over and over again, and she cannot get a hold of April. By 9 p.m., she decides to call the police, let them know that April's missing. The police are with her. She starts freaking out. She says she just had a really bad gut feeling that something had happened, and she goes to call the stepdad because he's at work to fill him in and let him know what's going on. She can't even get the words out. The cops actually have to take the phone from her and let the stepdad know what's going on, so then he leaves work and goes home to be with his wife. The police are talking to the mom, trying to get more information on both her life, like her friends, her day-to-day, her boyfriend, as well as specifics of the day, like what she was wearing, if she said where she was going, if she has different trails that she usually sticks to try and see where they should be looking. The cops tell the mom to call her boyfriend, Austin, to see if maybe she said anything to him about where she was going. And he says, it's around 9:30 p.m. now, but he says that at 7 p.m., April texted Austin and said, "I think I almost got kidnapped." So this is now a more serious case. Obviously, April was scared enough to text her boyfriend of someone on the trail, and now she can't be found. The team of police officers in the village is obviously very small, so they bring in the FBI to help them out with the investigation. They go back to the station to try and figure out a game plan, and when they do, they get a 911 call from a man that says he was riding his bike with his wife on that trail. A dog comes up to them, and it seems like the dog was trying to take them somewhere, so the man follows the dog, who ends up being Penny, April's dog. The dog walks up to a dead body and just lays next to the dead body and starts whimpering, which is so sad. When the police go out to look at the body, it was pretty much confirmed that it was April because it matched the outfit exactly like what the mom said she had been wearing earlier in the day. It was very clear that whatever happened was very violent. She was found with a pile of blood under her head. She was laying in a ditch around 20 feet away from the trail. She was partially undressed, so her pants were pulled down to her knees, and then her shirt was ripped open, so her entire body was exposed. She also had footprints on her head and her neck. Just stepping all over someone after you've killed them is beyond me. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head that caused a brain bleed along with strangulation. It was also found that she had 48 separate injuries, so very, very violent. The town is obviously freaking out. They're upset. They're full of fear. A girl was found dead, and whoever did that to her is just out there, and they don't know who it is. The FBI, again, is involved, and they're working with the police to try and come up with a timeline of events based on the evidence that they had. This is what police believe to have happened. April is out walking. Penny, an older man, comes up to her, tries to flirt with her. April is like, "No, thank you." She starts walking away, and that's when she texts her boyfriend and says, "I think I almost got kidnapped." They believe the man comes up to her again and is now angry because he's been rejected, hits her in the back of the head, and then takes her to the ditch and beats her to death. Because of the text that she sent her boyfriend, they were able to track the phone and see exactly where she was standing. They believed the attack happened somewhere between 6:30 to 6:45 p.m. The police are trying to talk to the public to see if anyone saw or heard anything. They're reaching out saying, if you were at this trail around this time, let us know. And a man does come forward and says that he saw a young girl that matched the description of April walking around that time. He also saw an older man on a blue and white motorcycle. So that blue and white motorcycle is pretty much the only lead, the only solid lead that they have now. And they did end up finding her phone a couple miles away from the crime scene. They just thought that the killer must have taken it with them and then ditched it. When they turn on April's phone, they see that she had the fitness tracker on while she was on her walk, and they're able to see her exact movements, the speed she was walking at, where she was walking, all the details. With that information, they pull up the times that her phone was moving around and the timeline that they believed to be true, and they compared the two. This is really sad because it gives you an idea of what she went through, but the minute that she texted her boyfriend that she almost got kidnapped, you see her fitness tracker app turn around like she's gonna start walking back home, and she starts walking faster. When she started walking faster, she was probably trying to get away from whoever had scared her, and then her location says it's still moving, but then all of a sudden it stops moving, and it's like it's in the same spot, but it's kind of going back and forth, and that's when it is believed that there was a struggle and she was trying to fight back, and then it moves away at 20 miles per hour, meaning it was fast enough that it had to be a different mode of transportation, not just walking, but not fast enough to be a car. So that would match the lead that they have of the blue and white motorcycle. Again, this is a pretty small town, so the cops are going around asking if anyone owns a blue and white motorcycle or if they know anyone that does. A woman comes forward and says that her neighbor does own a blue and white motorcycle, but that she actually hasn't seen it in a while. And the time that she stopped seeing the motorcycle was around the time of the murder. So the cops go and figure out who these neighbors are that own this motorcycle. And it is a dad and a son. Both of their names are James Van Callis. The dad is 66 years old and the son is, I think he was 33, I could be mistaken though, but around his 30s, and he had a girlfriend and a little 3-year-old boy, so they lived in the house as well. Both Jameses had criminal records. James, the dad, was a registered, and his victims were girls under the age of 13. James, the son, also had a criminal record of breaking and entering, things of that nature. Police get a search warrant to search their house, and they're specifically trying to look for / find the bike. They also want to find the shoes that match the footprints at the crime scene. They were Nike Jordans. They're not able to find the bike or the shoes or really any other evidence that connected them to April, but they did find evidence that one, they had a motorcycle, for example, helmets, bike, riding suits, and they also found a picture of James the son wearing those kind of shoes, but the actual things were nowhere to be found. What they did find were, so they arrested them on those charges, and they were tactical with the arrest. They arrested them on the charges, but they didn't mention anything about April yet because they didn't want to scare them off. So they take both Jameses to the station. They're questioning both of them. They take DNA samples and they test it against the DNA found on the crime scene. However, there is no match. But it is theorized that James the son, which is the one that is believed to have committed the murder because it was his bike, he would put on like the bike suits, like the really tight, they almost look like surfing water suits. He would go out on bike rides. So it's theorized that because he probably had one of those on, he didn't get any of his DNA on April, but there would have probably been April's DNA on whatever outfit he was wearing. So the cops are focusing more on James the son because he is the owner of the motorcycle, and they think that he was the one that did it. And again, their theory is that someone came up to April and was trying to flirt with them. Then they got mad when April rejected them, and that's why they hit and killed April. They look at James's the son, his search history, and there's a lot about young girls, such as, why don't these young girls like me? Why don't they want me? So the cops have the idea that whoever did that to April was mad because they were rejected, and James literally Googling, why don't these girls like me? These young girls like me, would match up with their theory. The Google searches basically just confirmed that James had already had those thoughts of, oh, I'm into these young girls and I get mad when they don't like me back. James is finally arrested on first-degree murder and assault with the intent. In court, his defense says that they don't have any actual evidence confirming that it was him that did the crime. There's no DNA. It's all basically circumstantial evidence. However, again, it is believed that he was probably wearing one of those biking outfits when he did it, which is why there wouldn't be any of his DNA on her. The prosecution brings up James's girlfriend to the stand, and she says that when the cops first went to their house after they left, James went up to her and said, "I really messed up really bad. You're gonna have to stick by me on this. And if anyone asks, tell them that the night of the murder, I was wearing this other different kind of brand of shoe, not Nike Jordans," which is the ones that would have been found at the crime scene. But like, actually so sus. The cops show up, so you know something serious is going on, and then your boyfriend comes up to you and says, "I really messed up, please cover for me." Obviously that's suspicious. She also says that the day of the murder, he left around 4:30 p.m. and then he was home by 9 p.m., which the cops thought that April was murdered between 6:30 to 6:45, so that would match up. The girlfriend says they fell asleep. She wakes up and realizes that he's gone again. She goes downstairs around 3 in the morning and finds James cleaning his helmet and his shoes with hand sanitizer. It's 3 in the morning, sir. Obviously, you're doing something suspicious if you are cleaning your shoes with hand sanitizer in the middle of the night. After James is being so weird and telling her to cover in case the cops ask anything else, she's freaked out, so she goes and looks through his backpack. I don't know if it was his helmet. She finds something with clumps of long hair that didn't match her hair color, but hair that matched April's hair color. In court, 2 witnesses also said that they saw James and April on the trail and that James was walking behind April, like 2 feet behind her, looking very angry, and April was looking very nervous. In 2016, James was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison. Since then, he has tried to appeal his sentence multiple times, but it's been rejected a lot. And to this day, James and his whole family maintain his innocence and say that he didn't do it and he was framed. I personally think that he did it. I mean, cops go to your house, you then go up to your girlfriend and say, "I messed up, please cover for me." You're washing your helmet and your shoes at 3 in the morning with hand sanitizer. You did something bad, and there was a girl found dead where you were with your motorcycle. That's my opinion, but let me know what you think. All right, love you. Go kiss someone that you love on the forehead and make somebody happy today. Also, if you go out on a walk or run, maybe literally share your location with every single person that you know and just stay safe. Okay.
This woman was sentenced to death for unaliving her terminally ill husband. The case of Wendy Andriano and the unaliving of her husband, Joe Andriano, is a lot. For a little bit of background, Joe Andriano was diagnosed with cancer a few years before his death, and at the time of his death, it had been terminal. On October 7, 2000, Wendy Andriano and her husband Joe went to a barbecue with their 2 small children. The family arrived back at their apartment at midnight, they put the children to bed, and at around 2:15 a.m., Wendy called her coworker, who was also her neighbor, to come watch her children while she took Joe to the hospital. It's important to note here that Wendy actually lived in the apartment complex she worked at. She was the property manager there, so her coworker also worked at this apartment complex. When the coworker arrived to the apartment, Wendy told her she had a problem. "Don't ask any questions, my husband's on the floor dying and I haven't even called 911. The coworker is understandably confused by this statement and tells Wendy she needs to call 911. The coworker actually enters the apartment. This is where she finds Joe lying on the living room floor, basically curled into a ball he had thrown up, and appeared very weak and like he was having difficulty breathing. Joe was still conscious at this point, told the coworker that he needed help for a very long time at this point and was wondering why it was taking so long for the paramedics to arrive. Wendy comes into the living room and tells her coworker she needs to get Joe up into the car so she could take him to the hospital because the paramedics were responding to another call. But Joe tells Wendy he can't move, so Wendy tries to pick him up, and when she can't lift Joe, she gets mad and starts yelling and cussing at him. By the point this has all gone down, the paramedics finally arrive. Everyone hears sirens outside. The coworker goes outside to direct the paramedics to the correct apartment. And as the paramedics are unloading their equipment, Wendy runs out of the apartment and starts screaming at them to go away. She then proceeds to go back inside the apartment, slams the door, at which point the coworker and paramedics walk up to the door, start knocking because they literally just got called to a medical emergency and they want to intervene and get Joe the help he needs. After about 5 to 10 minutes of knocking on the door, the fire department decides to call the Andriano's home phone in an attempt to get Wendy to come outside. When they are finally able to speak to Wendy, she said she would come out and talk to them. But instead of coming out the front door, which opened up to the living room and would give everyone, including paramedics, a clear view of Joe, who by this point was throwing up and in excruciating pain, Wendy went out through the back door, climbed over the back patio wall, walked around the apartment complex to the front door. She explains to paramedics that Joe was dying of cancer and had a do not resuscitate order, and explained that this was not the way he wanted to go, so paramedics and the coworker just left. At around 3:39 a.m., Wendy calls 911 again to say she has just stabbed and beat her husband in self-defense. The same paramedics respond to the scene and saw Wendy standing outside wearing a bloody t-shirt talking to a police officer. When the paramedics walk inside the apartment, they notice Joe lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Joe is very badly beaten. He has stab wounds on his neck, lacerations to his head, and to really understand the brutality of this, you could see pieces of Joe's brain matter. A police officer who entered the apartment also noticed that the blood around Joe's head was already starting to dry. They also notice a broken bar stool covered in blood near Joe's body, and pieces of a lamp, a kitchen knife with blood on it, a bloody pillow, and a belt. An examination of Joe's body actually determined that he had sustained at least 23 blows to the back of his head, and 8 to 10 of those were enough to knock him out. He also had 3 stab wounds to the left side of his neck that extended all the way down to his spine. On top of all of this, they find trace amounts of sodium azide in his blood and gastric contents. If you don't know what sodium azide is, it's this salt-like substance that when ingested can be fatal and interferes with the body's ability to use oxygen. But Joe ultimately didn't die from the sodium azide in his system, but it did make sense as to why Joe would have been curled in a ball and vomiting. Obviously, Wendy was arrested and taken in for questioning, at which point a search had begun of the Andriano's storage unit. And this is where investigators find a lot of sodium azide. They even go back to the apartment and they find little pill capsules with sodium azide inside a bottle that was marked as an herbal supplement. It's important to note here that shortly after Wendy was taken into custody, she called another one of her coworkers and told them to hide certain things that were in her office. Now, Wendy claims that she acted in self-defense because when she had told Joe about an affair she had been having, he flew into a rage and attacked her, so she fought back. Police start digging into her past and they find that during the summer of 2000, Wendy had a brief affair with a man named Rick, who was also a resident of the apartment complex that she lived and worked at. But this affair ended in July of 2000 when Rick found out that Wendy was married and even had children. Wendy was obviously upset about the affair ending, and on one occasion she stood outside of Rick's apartment late at night banging on the door and telling him that she would get the master key if he didn't let her in. They also found evidence of other affairs that Wendy had. And ultimately, Wendy was charged with the murder of Joe, and 4 years after his death on August 23, 2004, her trial began. Wendy's defense was that she was a domestic violence victim who lived in fear of her abusive husband and she attacked him in self-defense. I want to make it very clear here to everyone that I am not dismissing claims of abuse because I really don't know what their marriage was like before this incident other than the affairs, but what we do know is that at the time of Joe's death, he was receiving chemotherapy, he had just been poisoned with sodium azide and was curled into the fetal position vomiting just before his eventual death. Now during the trial, there is a lot that is revealed. Wendy's hairdressers actually testify and say that Wendy told her that Joe wanted to keep the marriage together, but Wendy was emotionally out of it. She just wished Joe was dead so she could move on with her life. We also learned that in the months before Joe's death, Wendy had made several attempts to obtain life insurance policies on Joe's life through various companies. Wendy got on the stand and testified that she had attempted to help Joe take his own life with the poison, and when it didn't work, her and Joe got into a physical altercation because she told him about an affair and he flew into a rage. She stayed adamant that this was an act of self-defense, but there were 23 blows to Joe's head along with 3 very severe stab wounds on top of the poison found in his body. And ultimately, the jury convicted her of the murder of Joe Andriano and she was sentenced to death. There was an appeal made in 2007, but it was ultimately denied, and Wendy Andriano currently sits on death row in Arizona. This case is a lot to unpack. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say about it in the comments. As always, thank you so much for your support, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. She was buried alive by her boyfriend and his roommate. It was September 17, 2003, and police had just discovered human remains covered in a tar-like substance in the wooded hills of Applegate, California. At this point, the remains are pretty decomposed, and police are thinking that it has to do with the tar-like substance that was poured over this body. Police eventually are able to identify the remains as belonging to 17-year-old Justine Vandershoot, who was reported missing just 2 weeks earlier. On September 2, 2003, Justine's mother, Lynette, woke up and actually found that Justine wasn't home that morning. Their back door was open and Justine's truck was gone. Lynette actually tries to call Justine, but Justine doesn't answer, and at first Lynette is thinking maybe she's with her boyfriend or her friends. Later that afternoon, Justine's 17-year-old boyfriend Daniel Bessemer actually calls Lynette and asks if she knows where Justine was, and this immediately made Lynette panic because she realized if her daughter wasn't with her boyfriend and he wasn't able to get a hold of her, where was she? So Lynette actually calls her husband Don and their older daughter Christine along with Justine's friends, but nobody nobody knew where Justine was, so her family goes to the police and they report her missing. Police start by talking with Justine's older sister, Christine, because Christine had been on the phone with her sister just the night before. She tells investigators that her and Justine just talked about daily life things and there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Police then bring in Justine's boyfriend and he tells him that he went to her house the night before and on his way home he stopped by 7-Eleven to buy a soda, but that was the last time he saw her. Daniel tells police that the day she went missing, he actually went to her school and the doctor's office she worked at to look for her, but he couldn't find her, and police are able to confirm this. They actually bring in Daniel's 20-year-old roommate, Brandon Fernandez, and he tells police that he and Daniel were alone in their apartment that night and they hadn't left. At this point, investigators don't have any real leads, and Justine's family starts putting up flyers all over town in hopes that someone has seen Justine. They even travel the roads in the area because they're thinking maybe Justine has been involved in a car accident. On September 3rd, Justine's truck was found in a park and ride lot just a few miles from her home. There were no keys in her truck, no notes, nothing. The truck looked as it was locked and parked, and then she just disappeared. By this time, her family holds a vigil at the park and ride site, and police set up surveillance to see if a possible suspect was in attendance, and they actually noticed a stranger that was pacing back and forth and smoking at the vigil. Police identify this guy and they question him, and it turns out this man had actually lost his daughter and was there because he put a plaque up for his daughter at this park and ride, and he wanted to support Justine and her family. So ultimately, he was cleared as a suspect as well. Almost 2 weeks into Justine's disappearance, investigators spoke with her friends again, and they find that Justine and Daniel's relationship was actually very rocky. They actually find out that Justine had actually met someone months earlier during a spring break getaway. Her friends didn't really know the guy other than he was in the Navy and his name was Dave. Police are able to track him down, bring him in for questioning, and they find out that he and Justine actually had broken off all communication in August, and they were able to rule him out as a suspect. With no other real suspects, police start to zero in on her boyfriend Daniel Bessemer, and they thought maybe he found out about her fling and was jealous, and this enraged him to the point of doing something to her. Not only was Daniel and Justine's relationship rocky, but Daniel's roommate Brandon and Justine also had tension between them because Justine knew that Brandon was cheating on his girlfriend. So they look closer into this alibi that the boys gave police, and they find it doesn't hold up. The night Justine disappeared, Brandon and Daniel actually had 2 friends from Alabama at their apartment, and these friends did try to corroborate this alibi that Brandon and Daniel gave, but it quickly fell apart, and one of the friends agreed to cooperate with investigators. First, they bring in Brandon, and they actually bring in an FBI profiler as well, and this is when Brandon comes clean. Brandon says that Daniel was angry that Justine had cheated on him, and he enlisted Brandon to use his tech skills to actually tap into Justine's phone and record her calls. So every single time Justine was calling this man she met on spring break, Daniel was on the other side listening because Brandon had tapped into her phone. Brandon also says that they came up with this plan to get Justine to meet them at the park and ride the night she disappeared. When she arrived, she hopped into Brandon's car with both him and Daniel. When they start driving, they put in this mixtape that the two made, and there were pieces of her recorded phone calls plugged in between songs, and they just played this until they reached a wooded area. Brandon claims he then gets out of a car, walks away, and he hears a scream. Brandon says when he returned to the car, he saw Justine on the ground next to a taser. The two of them dug a grave to put her in and poured a solution on her to make her decomposition a little bit quicker. Cover her with dirt and a discarded mattress that was in the area, and then they leave and act like nothing happened. Realizing that Brandon had just implicated himself in the murder, he tried to make a deal with police, and he said that he would take them to where she was buried, and he did, and that is where they find Justine's remains covered in the black tar-like substance. Through an autopsy, they're able to determine that there was evidence of strangulation, but Justine was not dead when she went into that grave. She was still alive. We were able to find dirt in her stomach to confirm this. In the end, both Brandon and Daniel were offered plea deals, which the Vandershoots agreed to in order to get their closure, and Brandon was sentenced to 15 years to life, and Daniel was sentenced to 25 years to life. This case is disturbing, it's heartbreaking, and it's just so sad because this girl trusted her boyfriend and then he took advantage of that, and ultimately she was buried alive by 2 people she thought she could trust. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about this case. I always like reading your guys' comments, so feel free to comment down below your thoughts on this case. As always, thank you guys for being here and your support. I look forward to seeing you guys again next time.
The family mysteriously disappeared in 1996 and were never found. What's up, my urban crimers? I got a good mystery for y'all tonight. Make sure you drop a like and hit that follow button for more true crime content. Follow me on YouTube for actual crime scene footage and interviews from victims. Also, tune in to my live tonight where we watch true crime stories together. Now let's get into the story. This is the very mysterious story of Everett and Lydia Thompson. They vanished from their home in 1996 along with their two sons, Everett Jr. and Andrew. This story takes place in Chicago, Illinois, also known to have one of the highest murder rates in U.S. history. Everett and Lydia were successful business owners in the Chicago area. They owned their own restaurant, Eat Company Pizza, and served to the thriving Chicago community. They had two young sons, 11-year-old Everett Jr. and 8-year-old Andrew, who they loved dearly. Lydia and her siblings inherited a home from her parents in which her family lived in. Lydia had a brother, Kenneth White, who was also living at the home. He was just released from prison on a rape conviction, and no one in the family wanted to take him in. So he was basically forced to live in the home that he inherited also. Family and friends were very unhappy about this decision. Everett's family looked at Kenneth as a freeloader, and they did not want him anywhere near their son. And only 4 months after Kenneth moved in, disaster would strike. One day, Lydia made a frantic call to police, stating that Kenneth was chasing her with an axe, and he also threatened to kill her multiple times. When police arrived, the situation had calmed down, so no reports were made. On July 5th, 1996, Eric received a frantic call from Lydia, stating that Kenneth was once again chasing her around the house with the axe and was threatening to kill her. She was so terrified that she was forced to lock herself inside a restroom. She begged Eric to come home right away and help her. Eric was also on the phone with his father when Lydia made the frantic call. He explained to his father what was happening and rushed home to help her. That would be the last time the father would hear from his son. 2 hours later, Kenneth arrives at the family restaurant. He is also driving the company van that Everett usually drives. When questioned on the whereabouts of Everett, Kenneth states that he was involved in a car accident and was also arrested for it. Employees of the restaurant also stated that they noticed blood on Kenneth's white shoes. Weeks had passed and Everett's father had not heard from him. He then went to police to do a welfare check on the family. When police arrived at the home, Kenneth was there all alone. He stated that the family went to Philadelphia to visit Everett's family. But didn't Everett's family send a wellness check? Over the next few weeks, Kenneth continued to make up various stories on where the family was. Everett's family would get frustrated and eventually travel to Chicago to look for the family themselves. The employees at the restaurant told them about Kenneth's story and also told them about the blood on his shoes. Police then began a further investigation on Kenneth. They later found out that there never had been an accident and Kenneth was lying about his stories, just trying to figure out how it took weeks for them to further investigate this man. Like, that's crazy. Everett's family would then put more pressure on authorities to find out the whereabouts of the family. They also discovered that Kenneth had forged Lydia's name on several documents, including one to sell the home. An inspector came and discovered the new owners had gutted out the entire home for new renovations. But despite all the evidence against him, charges were still never brought against Kenneth. He moved to a trailer in Gary, Indiana in July of 1997, just a year after the family's disappearance, and continued with his normal life. But in November of 1997, he was arrested for failing to register as a sex offender. He was released, but then arrested again a month later for forging Lydia's signature on a $13,000 check. Kenneth White will go on to hang himself in his jail cell on Christmas Day in December of 1997. He had no motive and did not leave a note. It's still unknown what happened to the Thompson family, and they have never been found. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Now that was a crazy one right there, y'all. Let me know what y'all think for real in the comments. If you like this story, make sure you drop a like and hit that follow button for more true crime content.
Why did these teenage twin girls unalive their own mother? Their mother, Nikki, was born in prison. Her own mother gave birth to her behind bars while she was in prison for substance charges. So she was raised by her grandmother, who tried to give her a good life, but Nikki was a rebellious child that did not like to follow the rules. This is what her grandmother said. So Nikki was pregnant by 17 with identical twin girls that went by the nicknames Jazz and Taz. But Nikki was a child herself. She said that she was not ready for the responsibilities that came with motherhood for one child, let alone twins. Nikki still wanted to be a teenager. She wanted to go out and party. She was this huge social butterfly. She wanted to go out. She wanted to drink, occasionally use substances. And Nikki was very much in and out of her twin daughters' lives whenever it was convenient for her. So Jazz and Taz were raised by Nikki's grandmother that had also raised her. But the girls really liked their life with their great-grandmother. They were sweet girls, innocent girls. They were in a lot of activities at school and really excelled in school. So when their mother, Nikki, tried to come back into their lives when they were 13 years old and tried to disrupt all of that, they were very angry. Nikki was 25 years old and living with her boyfriend, who was a 55-year-old man named Robert, who was gone a lot for work. Nikki had turned her life around. She was clean, she had gotten a degree, she had gotten a job, and she was ready to have custody of her 13-year-old daughters. So now Jazz and Taz are living with their mother, Nikki, and they are angry. They liked living with their great-grandmother. They liked their school. They liked their friends. They did not think it was fair that this was all stolen from them because a woman who was always in and out of their life finally wanted to make them a priority. They absolutely resented Nikki, and these sweet, innocent girls that they were always described as began to rebel. They were staying out late and partying. They were dating older guys, like 17-year-old boys, when they were only 13. So to combat this, Nikki wanted to discipline them and be an authority figure. She wanted to give them lots of rules and structure because she did not want her daughters to make the same mistakes that she did. But this just put a bigger wedge between Jazz and Taz and Nikki. It was very much 2 against 1. In the twins' eyes, their mother, Nikki, is a hypocrite. Like, how are you gonna tell us that we can't date older guys and party when you've been partying our entire life instead of raising us, and you're literally dating someone who's 30 years older than you? This anger that the twins felt for Nikki turned to hate, and then it turned violent, and they would attack Nikki, which landed them in juvie. And when they were released back in Nikki's custody under a 2-week trial period to see if they could make it work, Nikki really wanted to work on their issues. She wanted to make things right. When they came home, she tried to throw them a welcome home party, but the one twin just left the house completely, and the other twin just locked herself in her room. And then everything came to a boiling point on January 13th, 2010, when Jazz and Taz, who were only 16 years old, claimed they came home from school and found their mother's body slumped over the bathtub. This was a gruesome scene, you guys. There was blood everywhere. Nikki had been hit over the head with a vase. She had 50 to 80 wounds from a sharp object, and then she passed away having her head held under the water of the bathtub. It was clear to the investigators that this attack was personal. This was not a random attack by an intruder. And Nikki's twin daughters are inconsolable. The one twin is shaking back and forth and violently biting at her own arm because she said it was the only thing that could calm her down. And when the twin girls were being questioned, they just kept crying and saying that they wanted their mama, which honestly was kind of suspicious to the investigators because both girls are saying that they want their mama, but neither of them really had anything nice to say about Nikki. Honestly, they had a lot of bad things to say about her. And they're crying, but there's no tears coming out. And also, both girls had a lot of injuries and cuts on their arms and hands, but without any solid evidence that they were involved, they just took photos of both their arms and hands and released them. And for months after that, Jazz and Taz just lived life as normal. They went to parties, they went to school, they were hanging out with their older boyfriends, going to prom. Until 4 months after Nikki was unalived and the investigators got that golden piece of evidence that they called it that incriminated the girls. Nikki's teeth perfectly lined up to the bite mark on the one girl's arm. When she said that she was biting herself to calm her down, she was really trying to cover up the fact that her mom bit her while her and her twin sister were unaliving her. They were arrested, and both girls took a plea deal for a full confession. What they said happened that day on January 13th, 2010 is they did not want to go to school that day. And this broke out in a huge fight between Nikki, Jazz, and Taz. And in their own words, it got so violent that they felt like it was either them or Nikki. And after this vicious attack on their mother that ended with her life being taken, they just cleaned themselves off and went to school like nothing happened. With the plea deal, the twin girls, who were only 16 years old when they unalived their mother, were given 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole and early release in May of 2025. But if they are denied parole, both girls will be released when they're 46 years old. I personally have a hard time racking my brain around the fact that these girls, before they went and lived with Nikki, were described by everyone as sweet and innocent. Those were the description words I kept seeing while researching this case. They were sweet and innocent. So if the girls were as sweet and innocent as everyone said, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that they committed this super violent crime. I feel like there's either something that we don't know, or the girls weren't always as sweet and innocent as everyone described them as, but you definitely have to let me know what you think about that. This is just my opinion, but I totally understand the resentment that Jazz and Taz felt with Nikki, but I do not think this crime was justified at all. And personally, 46 years old, they will be released one day. The latest they will be released is 46 years old, and that's a lot of life left to live. And if the girls were as sweet and innocent as everyone described them as, and then they just hated their mother, that they were able to snap and commit this truly violent crime, that scares me. But you're gonna have to let me know what you think about that. Definitely let me know all your thoughts, theories, questions, everything in the comments section. I read my comments all the time. I reply to as many as I can. And while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so, so, so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Also, one final note, I was getting absolutely roasted in my comment section of the video I posted yesterday because turns out Job Corps, the S and the P are silent. I had no idea, and I've been mispronouncing that my entire life. So thanks for letting me know.